All right, so we're back with another video on drum bus compression. This is the fourth video in the series. In the first video, we did some ear training, and the second video, we talked about dialing in standard bus compression to add a little extra punch and a little extra room and body. And in the third video, we set up parallel processing, and we did one bus for punch and snap and another bus for fatness and roominess. Now, what we're going to do today is add in another parallel bus that I call the space bus. Now, the space bus is just going to be for stereo width and expansion, but it's also going to be for depth. And this is a pretty awesome setup, and we're going to blend in a little of this behind the original signal, and then our drums will be complete. So let's dive right in and start making a space bus. So here's our original drum kit with the standard compression plus the punch bus and the fat bus. So here's what the fat bus sounds like on its own. Yep. Not very much transient, just all about the space and the room and the fatness of the drums. Here's what the punch bus sounds like. That's that horrible, nasty stabbing sound that we want. That's just for blending in the punch. Here's the kit. And we'll blend in the punch. And blend in the room. All right, so that's what we've done so far. We've taken our regular drum kit, given it a nice standard compression, and we've added in these two parallel buses. So now let's add a space bus. I'm going to send the entire drum kit that has the kick bus, the snare bus, the toms, the hi-hat, ride, overheads, everything from the drum kit is going 100% pre-fader to the space bus. Now, these will stay independent of the punch bus and the fat bus. So the first thing we're going to do to the space bus now is compress it a little harder. And we're just after the peaks. We're going to use Fetish by Analog Obsessions, which is a FET compressor modeling the 1176. The send from the drum kit is going 100% pre-fader to the space bus, like we said. So that's including the standard drum bus compression and all of the processing from the tom bus, the kick bus, and the snare bus. But we're going to take out the peaks a little further now and reduce the dynamics in the space bus, so we have more of a consistent sound to work with that we can blend in behind the mix. This style 1176 is program dependent, so you won't see a threshold, and it's going to determine with the input here how far we drive in the signal to get the gain reduction. Now, I want this to not overreact to the kick, so the sidechain filter here, I'm going to set at 120 hertz, so above the kick but below the snare. And I'm going to go for a super fast attack, a super slow release, and a ratio of 6:1. And that's great right there. Just a couple dB of gain reduction taken off those peaks. So nice and easy. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is EQ the space bus. And we're going to do this with a simple high pass. And I'm going to set the slope at 12 dB, not too steep, so I don't get any phasing issue from doing parallel processing. If I start to hear a little, I'll back the slope off to 6 dB. Now, I'm going to take this all the way up to right around where the snare's fundamental is. And actually, I'll back that slope off to let a little more of the kick through. And if I switch the interface to output, there you go. You can see that the low frequency stuff is still coming through, but we're rolling it off. If I go back to input, there, you can see how much more information's down here in the bass. Yeah, back to output. There, very nice. All right. Now we're going to turn on the low node, and right now this is set at 80. We're going to drop it down to about 70 hertz, and we're going to compress the low end even harder here. I'm going to crank the ratio up to 10:1. All right, so what that's doing now is compressing the low end. We're not after a lot of low end from the space bus. We don't want to eliminate it altogether, but we're going to really squash it and get it under control. And now I'm going to start increasing the frequency range above the fundamental of the kick and approach the fundamental of the snare and take a listen and see how much of the low end of the snare that I want to compress. there we go. And we're catching the low end of the toms as well. So that's right about at 160 hertz. And that's good. So all we've done is a high pass filter and then extra compression just on the low end. And that's very nice. And now for the high end, what we're going to do is give us a nice boost and shelf here and raise up the high end. We flatten out the Q so it's real smooth. And we want to be above the vocal clarity range, so I'm going to take it right up to about 9 or 10K, and we'll take a listen. But that's just a 4 dB high shelf there. So this is just going to add high-end shimmer to the drums. So when we blend it in the background, when we do our mid-side processing, it's going to shine out on the sides. Real nice. Let's take a listen. All right, now we are going to compress that high end. I'm going to leave the attack pretty fast. I am going to slow down the release, take it up to about 150 milliseconds or so, and we'll take a listen to that. And I'm just going to go with a ratio of about 6:1, and we're going to bring the threshold down so we start to catch the cymbals and the hi-hat and stuff and just keep them under control. And you can see that high band dancing there. That's just going to smooth out the high end that we're adding. So we're boosting up there, but we're also compressing it a little bit. It's not very active all the time, but when things jump out, it helps squash them down. So that's just going to keep the high end shimmer that we're adding to our space bus nice and dynamically controlled. And so that's really what we're going for here, is a controlled signal for the space bus with not a lot of dynamics, just a lot of sculpting and shaping. And then one last thing, we're going to add in a node for the vocals and just do a little bit of a narrow Q here. The vocal clarity range in this song is right around 2.5K. So I'm just going to take out a few dB right there because what we're doing with the space bus, we really don't want to interfere with the vocals at all. Now let me bypass that node so you can hear the difference. Back on. If I solo it, that's the frequency range right there that we're dipping out a little bit. This is similar to the Abbey Road reverb style idea. We're just keeping this out of the way of the vocal. And in band solo here, this is really nice. This is where I could also solo out the vocal track and explore right here until I find where the vocal clarity range is. But for this vocal, it's right around 2.5K. All right, so that's our EQ work. And now for the fun part. Now we're going to add MSED, which is the mid-side encoder decoder, which is free from Voxengo. And what we're going to do now is just turn the mids down quite a bit. We're mainly just after stereo expansion here. Yeah, that's pushing everything out to the sides there. I could boost the sides if I want, but I'm just going to blend this in with the fader, so it doesn't really matter. And then in the context of the mix, I'll decide how much of the mids I want to reduce, because I do want to watch my overall stereo image and make sure I'm not pushing the sides above the mids too far in the final mix. Now, the nice thing about this as well is there's still a decent amount of transient information on the space bus. You can hear the crack of the snare and the high mid of the kick, and you can hear the crack of the toms. So this is going to push transients out to the sides. And this is a great trick on a drum set. If you can increase transient information, which is usually pretty mono, if you can give it an increased presence out on the sides of your stereo image a little bit, that's a really cool trick, especially when we hit it with the stereo reverb. So this is just going to give us a little more side presence on those transients, which is really cool. And this is what's adding the stereo width now. We're spreading our drum kit out on the sides. And now what we need is a little bit of depth. And the next thing we're doing is bringing on the sample delay, which is also free by Voxengo. And now what we're going to do is flip the phase on the space bus. So it's a 180 phase polarity from the regular drum kit and the extra parallel processing buses. And we're going to add in this tiny bit of sample delay. If we do too much, we're going to have a really out of phase sound. But a little tiny bit blended into the background is going to add depth to the space bus and separate it in terms of depth from the original drum kit. So Take a listen now, just listening to the original drum kit, and then I'm going to fade in this space bus. And what you're going to listen for is the stereo expansion from the mid side, and also this sample delay is going to make it sound a little deeper. Now, if I increase the sample rate too far, it'll start to sound a little out of phase. Yeah, see, there it's starting to get a little weird. If I bring it back down, all right, and I'll mute the space bus now. And back on. Yeah, so we have the stereo expansion. So mostly we're adding a high-end sheen on the sides, and we're adding that sense of depth there. It's actually pretty dramatic. We probably don't need this much blended in the final mix. But for right now, let's turn on our parallel buses. So now we have everything rolling, and I'm going to back the space bus off to 0 again, and we'll listen to the drum kit, both parallels, and we'll start fading in the space bus. Yeah, very cool. Now, the next thing we want to do is ambiance. I could totally set up another auxiliary bus, but what I'm going to go ahead and try is putting it directly on the track, which is not what we normally do, but I'm actually going to wash this space bus out a little bit. We're going to dial in a little bit of a surround sound delay here, and you could play around at this point with whatever ambiance you want that suits your song. And now we're going to add some reverb, and we're going to use this one here, which I like, because what we're going to do is take out all of the early reflections. So now we're just after late reflections here. There, we've washed it out a lot. So we have a little bit of the surround delay going on, ping-ponging around, and we're washing it out with a nice big fat reverb here. All right, so there's a pretty modest amount of the space bus blended in, and it's pretty extreme processing, but at the end of the day, we're just using a tiny little bit of it. So here is the drum kit with both parallel buses with the space bus muted, and then when I turn it on, you'll hear the subtle enhancement in the background of width and depth and just opening up a whole new life to the drum kit. And I'll turn it up too far so it's real obvious. And mute. Back on. All right. And realistically, for just a hint of this in a mix, somewhere in here is probably fine. Mute. And back on. And again, this is the space bus on its own. So that's the tiny bit that we have blended in. And one more time, I'm going to fade it up till it's way too much so it's real obvious. I'm going to shorten that tail on the reverb. It's a little too long. All right. And that's it all the way taken out. And we'll blend back in a little bit to taste. Yeah, very cool. Just a tiny bit of space bus there to fill out the rest of the drums. This is a whole new level here. It's very, very effective. And I think you can see how this would be useful, not just for a drum bus, but in a lot of different situations. But there it is, the space bus. That's a pretty creative and extreme processing technique. It's not something I would use all the time, but it's a really neat little thing to know about. There are so many creative things that you can do with parallel processing and mid-side enhancement and using a tiny bit of sample delay to create depth in your mix. Is this the kind of thing you would put on every song? Probably not. And is this the kind of thing that would be way easy to overdo and get carried away? Yes, absolutely. But as a subtlety, if you use it discreetly, it can really set your drum kit apart and your mix apart by having this extra little flavor and nuance there in the background of width and depth and sparkle and sheen and all that good stuff. And you could also saturate this bus. You could add exciters to it. There's all kind of things you could do to this. It can be a really creative accent to your project. But there you go. I hope you like that. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll catch you on the next one.